This week, we're talking about that huge Xbox leak. This is the Good Game, Bad Game podcast.
This is a song I wrote about the Good Game, Bad Game podcast. Good Game, Bad Game podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Good Game, Bad Game podcast. I'm your host, Spencer, and with me is a man who is trading in his spacesuit for cybernetic enhancements. It's my co-host, Mike. Mike, how are you?
In a conundrum, I guess, because that's been the battle this week. So to alleviate that, I've played neither. No, so yeah, Cyberpunk came out, well, yesterday for me, 2 days ago for everyone else. And I have not played it yet. I told Justine that I was probably going to spend all day Tuesday playing it,
Mm-hmm.
and then work. I forgot I worked. I forgot I had a mortgage. So that didn't happen. So probably by the end of this weekend. Listen, here's the thing. I know I'm going to start it, and I'm not going to want to put it down.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm also, I played a ton of Starfield, so now I'm like, it's got its hooks in me. It's a hard battle.
I mean, I both love and hate that. I'm so happy that like Starfield has been, everything it's needed to be that like satisfying game for you. But I also hate that you now have to like choose between two juggernauts for yourself.
In my head, I see it like the meme where there's a guy and a girl laying in bed, and the guy is like facing the other way, and the girl's saying, "I bet he's thinking about other women," and then it's usually just something completely irrelevant that he's thinking about.
Yeah.
That's how I feel it'll be once I jump into Cyberpunk, because I'll be playing Cyberpunk, but like, will I be fully engaged, or will I still be thinking about Starfield?
Yeah. Johnny Silverhand's going to be laying in bed with you, and you're going to be turned the other way thinking about Starfield.
Yeah, I bet he's thinking about Starfield.
Oh man, it's crazy. It's.
No, I don't want Johnny Silverhand in bed with me. I want Idris Elba. That's the goal.
I'm sorry.
I've never thought well, I have thought about modding a game before, but I've never modded a game before. I'm thinking about doing it to sleep with Idris Elba.
Yeah, that's fair. I have bought it. I bought it yesterday. I have not. I have also not had the opportunity to start it yet, and I'm in the same boat as you, where this weekend is like I'm gonna have to budget my time because I haven't played Baldur's Gate in over a week.
Oh,
I know, like didn't play it since coming back, and so it's like I want to get back into that, but I also like desperately want to play Cyberpunk, and just over 20 days away, I've got Spider-Man 2 hanging over my head, and I still haven't started God of War Ragnarok, and it's just like, what a mess. What an absolute mess I'm in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful mess, that's for sure.
Definitely is. So was most of last week, I'm guessing most of your time was spent playing Starfield?
Yeah, it was pretty much exclusively Starfield. I can't remember if I played Pikmin 4 at all. But there's a lot of parallels between those games, so it's easy to go back and forth. But yeah, dude, I forget what day it was, but I played it for like 7 or 8 hours straight.
Oh, love that. Oh.
So, okay, and I know we've got a quick time frame here, but I was going to go on to like just do one more section of a main mission. And then something happened that, as far as I know, has like derailed my game in perpetuity.
Oh.
And it was an accident. And I don't want to share too many details, But I did something completely on accident. Like it was one of those deals where I almost thought about restarting or going back to a previous save.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just let it play out or whatever. And I have like an entirely new story arc now.
Interesting.
And I have not touched the main story since this has started. Uh, it's wild. And I think I read this happened to somebody else too, so I think it's a relatively common uh part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But just crazy. Just I went on there to do one section of the main mission. 8 hours later, didn't even touch that section because I was doing this whole other story arc. Insane.
I love that. Yeah. Bethesda's kind of like king of that, I feel like, with the way the web that they build out for their stories. Um
And it's like, so the thing that happened in retrospect, I was kind of like, did Bethesda plant that there, assuming that most people would take the action that I did and then it would kick the storyline off? Because it was so subtle.
mm-hmm.
The thing that I did. Um, and if so, that is just like mastered gameplay writing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. They're so good at that. Somebody was comparing they were doing like a very light comparison of Starfield and Cyberpunk and how the two are similar in comparisons as The Witcher to Skyrim is, and like that's my immediate reaction when I think of like how I played through Skyrim versus how I played The Witcher 3. It's like CD Projekt Red does a really good job of building out this like robust story, but at the end of the day, it's everybody's following that story to a T for the most part. Whereas with Skyrim and Starfield, you have a little more free reign, and there's actually a little more again like of a choice web that can lead you to like vastly different paths. Um, and it's something that's super satisfying about a Bethesda RPG.
Yeah, it's usually, you know, me, I would, it just feels like too much nuance sometimes. I'm just like, I just want to play a linear game.
Mm-hmm.
And it put it into perspective for me this week because I people complain when games are only like 8 or 9 hours long if there's like a complete linear story or even
Mm-hmm.
like 12 hours long. I tend to like that. It just fits better in my life. And the next thing I know, I'm like 30 something hours into Starfield. And it's like, why do these linear games, like, why does 8 to 12 hours of a linear game feel like a lifetime? But I have just blown 30 something hours of my life in a blink of an eye in
Yeah.
Starfield. It's crazy.
It is.
It's just like a totally new outlook on those games for me.
Well, I love it. I'm so happy that you're enjoying it to the level that you are.
Me too.
Well, I would hope you're happy with it. All right. Well, it wouldn't be a GGBG sort of week if we didn't need to push topics and everything back, and it also wouldn't be a vacation if huge news didn't break. While I was out sailing the seven seas, I was still receiving messages, so I just couldn't respond to anything. And so I saw your message of like you picked a great week to be off, and then
Yep.
I finally was back in service. I was like, all right, I've got like 6 hours, like get me caught up real quick before I'm like without my phone again, which was glorious. And what is waiting for me and the entire video game world is this massive leak from Xbox, which I want to just start out by saying that a leak of this magnitude is simultaneously, it's the same way I felt about the whole like Xbox and FTC and like how all these documents were getting released and stuff. Obviously, there was information that was redacted in those. These are all completely unredacted, non-redacted. um, I don't know the right word there, but
Well, they were never redacted in the first place, so I
so
guess they're not unredacted.
yeah, non-redacted.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Anyway, the like good thing about these types of things is like it's great to kind of like be able to like peel back and like see behind the curtains and get a better understanding of how the behind the scenes of these companies actually works. The negative in it is that like it almost feels kind of gross, and like it feels like, especially with this leak, where it's like there's a ton of information getting pushed out there that I feel bad for the people who are tied to it, like now having to kind of like jump into action to try and play clean up a mess that should have never been there in the first place, I guess. um so it's like there's good and bad to these types of things, and the good is that we get to again kind of get like a peek behind the curtain, and we get to talk about some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think Phil Spencer put it pretty well when he said, the disappointing thing about this is that so much of the game industry is built on surprising customers.
Mm-hmm.
And now that has been completely pulled away from the next generation. And not only is that bad for the customers, I don't know. Yes, we're talking about it, but at this point, the horse is already dead. So,
Yeah, 100%. And
but I don't know. I don't like that. I wish they would have just said, "Oh, it was leaked," and then nothing come out. But that's obviously unrealistic.
right. And I think also, I totally agree with the whole like, he's so right. So much of it is about surprising gamers, right? Think about when you're watching some of these events and suddenly a trailer pops up that, I'm thinking specifically as like a PlayStation player. If like Naughty Dog, like if it's a black screen and suddenly Naughty Dog pops up, I'm
Yep.
super hyped, right? If I know 2 months prior that like Naughty Dog's probably going to be at the show, also Naughty Dog's making this game, also here's 2 seconds of video of that game. Okay, well now Naughty Dog pops up. I'm still excited, but like it's diminished. It's not nearly what it could have been. And like playing up the hype train is huge. He also brought up a really good point, and it's definitely going to be one of the things I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a second. But like some of these communications and stuff were from 2020. So communications that are 3 years old at this point. Obviously business plans change, and so things that were talked about in some of these messages and stuff like that people are kind of latching onto and really like blowing up could have been dead a week after the email was sent, so that's the other thing to, I think, take into consideration. Like there were a couple of games that were talked about in terms of like I think it was mostly, I think it was only Bethesda games that were like that are in the pipeline that were leaked. I don't think anything like Microsoft first party outside of like Bethesda's work was discussed.
Um,
At least I didn't think.
Was there? I think you might be right. I'm trying to find see if the graphics up.
Because
Honestly, I don't know.
most of the stuff that was brought up, I think, in the FTC case was like, well, we need to take a look at what you did with your ZeniMax acquisition to try and prove what you're going to do with your Activision acquisition, right? So I think for the most part, they only had to bring to table because like whatever Xbox is going to do with Halo should have no impact on like
Right.
why they should or should not be allowed to buy Activision. Whereas I could see why you would scrutinize another acquisition. So, but anyway, like obviously we know how the gaming industry works. We know how release and like how working on games works, right? Like games constantly get delayed, constantly get scrapped, assets are rolled into other games instead, stuff like that. So obviously everything should be taken with a grain of salt, and you shouldn't believe anything to be fact until Xbox comes out and actually shows said thing. But nonetheless, when they do that, which again with a lot of the Bethesda stuff, we're talking about like remasters of some like old games and then like new games that they're planning, and it's like now when they go to finally show that they are truly working on that, it's like, okay, well, I already kind of knew you were probably working on that. And so to Phil Spencer's point, you lose that like surprise aspect that I think
Yeah.
2 of the games would have garnered a lot of surprise and fanfare and stuff like that if they turn out to be actually in production. So
Yeah, I think in terms of uh the game's timeline, like you said, it's you knew these things were coming.
mm-hmm.
So nothing terribly surprising there. For me, I kind of have 2 big points from this. One, the hardware leaks, um, which we'll go more in depth on. I think were pretty damaging for how Microsoft now has to run the next 5 years of the Xbox business.
Mm-hmm.
So we can talk about that, and then, uh, I think I almost think the communications. So I guess we can start going kind of into depth with this, but one of the things that was leaked were some internal conversations about Phil Spencer wanting to acquire Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
And to be brief, it sounds to me like that conversation was never really opened up to Nintendo, but there was internal conversation saying, "Hey, here are our numbers. We could possibly do this."
Yeah, like what if we took a harder look at this? What if we actually tried?
Mm-hmm.
Could it be possible? And it seems like the thought was entertained at the very least.
Right. And it was all very, you could tell it was kind of Phil Spencer's baby. I mean, he said verbatim it would be a career moment.
Which is
For-
not an exaggeration.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be. But I almost kind of wonder if, like, 'cause I know Satya Nadella was on these emails, if he was just kind of like, okay, Phil, uh, let's maybe hold our horses a little bit. But I think it sheds a lot of light on how these conversations are happening, and it's not like we're really gonna fuck Sony this time. We're gonna get them.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna get to Nintendo first. It's just they have great assets. I mean, they're very complementary to what other organizations have done, and how that will kind of inherently help their business, and not, we're gonna take Nintendo, kill the Switch, and hang Mario, and replace him with a guy from Psychonauts. It was just very complimentary to the things that they did. There was respect in the business, and it was all framed in the way of how was this good for the industry,
Mm-hmm.
Which I think shed a lot of light on Microsoft's process.
100%.
But man, would that have been cool?
Yeah. And I think it's like funny how, these sort of things kind of like run the internet gauntlet, because I think you said it like perfectly. Like these communications likely never went beyond, you know, internal, like Phil Spencer just smoked a bowl of weed and said, "What if?" Right? Like,
Yeah.
but people were like really running with it and saying like, "Yeah, okay, Nintendo coming off of its like most successful console, that is like still crushing, and like you're doing this in 2020 when the Switch blew up really even more, and kind of making it seem like uh Phil Spencer was almost arrogant or ignorant to the fact of like how big Nintendo truly is. And I think that's just I think that's a totally like I think that's a total misread on the entire email that got released.
Yeah.
And I think you really summed it up.
Well, it's not like Nintendo absolutely at this point does not need a lifeline. Um, but you can kind of tell, and this is really always, well, at least with the Switch, I think has been the case that they are the only reason they built the Switch was to be a vessel for playing games.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, yeah, that's obvious. It's the video game industry. You need something to play games. But it's not like the Switch is or ever was a high quality console. I mean, it's using components that are 10 years old. It's built like shit. Um, like it's not good technically.
Yes.
Obviously, it is, likely the best console of all time.
Right.
But that is based on IP, not based on how it was built. So, if you're Microsoft, you look at that and say, okay, well, here's the proposition for Nintendo. They don't need to make hardware anymore. They bring the IP to Xbox, and I think Xbox would have their hand forced to build a local handheld console.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like it needs to be like the Switch just because of how well their infrastructure is for kind of crossplay within the ecosystem. You could have a handheld and then just play on your Xbox and know that your save game is going to be there. I mean, they're really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a valid proposition for both of them. And I wonder how sustainable. We know with the Switch 2 that was demoed at Gamescom, it's essentially PS4. So again, Nintendo is only making a console that is the bare minimum to play their games.
Right.
So I don't know how sustainable that is. I hope it is. Like, trust me. I think we're better off Nintendo being their own company.
Yes.
But I don't think it's an invalid analysis to do.
No, definitely not. And I think as a company, you always have to be considering things like this, right? Like,
yeah.
If you're not willing to ask these questions or try and like kind of scratch the surface at the very least of these things, how can you ever really expect to continue to grow and stuff like that? If Xbox just stayed complacent with where they were at, maybe Activision was just too obvious. But again, they could have just not even considered it, because they could have said, no, we already have Halo, and that's already its own thing and constantly is compared to Call of Duty, except it's only on our system and stuff like that, or whatever. If you don't ask those questions, you can't ever expect to continue to grow and better the company. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I agree. At this point, it's like I wouldn't want Nintendo to fold into another company, and I doubt they would. But if they put out the Wii U too, who knows? Maybe they'll have to consider it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they'll be fine for at least another decade.
Yeah.
That's not a hard cap. That's just why would I speculate any further than that?
Right. I thought the email that leaked that I found the most interesting, and the one that I actually I enjoyed reading the most from Phil Spencer, was the one regarding PlayStation's announcement of the PS5. The tone of that email was so holy shit, we won. And I loved it. I loved the confidence that he had in saying that we have the superior product, which technically they do. And then also coupling it with the fact of knowing the value that they have with Game Pass and stuff like that. Seeing a communication like that was, again, I just thought was really cool.
Yeah, it's I kind of read it and I was like, oh, Phil. Because I would say so far, based on the numbers, they haven't won, right?
Right.
Yeah, at least in this generation. I think Sony's off to a good lead. I wouldn't say it's a commanding lead, but it's at least good that he has that attitude. And I think that's kind of the edge that Xbox brings. Jim Ryan, if it were on the other foot, Jim Ryan would probably not say anything to get anybody in the organization excited and to think they're actually doing something important.
Right. Just it feels like it feels like Jim Ryan would just be buzzword central,
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a textbook NBA email to everybody, and everyone would be like, okay, we're playing video games here.
And just remind me, do people actually play these games?
So you are telling me. Yeah. What character?
I just it just felt like those documentaries you see of draft day, and the team is so pumped that the player that they coveted fell to them, for their first round pick. That's how it read to me. And I just I loved reading it. I loved seeing that kind of peek behind the curtain of this is some of the internal communications that happen around these massive events that we see every year where people are showing off their games. You have to wonder if a similar thing happened with Summer Game Fest this year, because Xbox's presentation was just absolutely killer, right? And so you have to wonder if when Sony did theirs 2 weeks earlier, if Phil Spencer had a similar thing of after seeing Sony's upcoming lineup, and knowing what we're about to show off, I am just through the roof at where Xbox stands today. I could just envision that.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see what else has been coming out. I guess the other main thing has been what you were saying, which is basically the hardware and timeline that Xbox seems to have in place.
Yeah. Let me find you're talking the hardware timeline?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this article's a mess. I'll just go off what I remember. Yeah, so we're looking. I think the big news was 2028 is the year that there's going to be a new Xbox, which About par for the course, right? 8 years.
Yep.
So I don't think that's all that surprising. But I guess we'll kind of jump right into it. I mean, this is, to me, I saw the plans for this, and we kind of had this hinted a little bit, and it feels like the next generation of consoles is going to finally be like a generational jump.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft in particular wants to have a hybrid unit, so you will, much to everyone's shock from 3 years ago, you will have a physical console. And there will be processing done on that console, and then it will also communicate with a client on a server that will do some additional computation. And that obviously allows for a much bigger scale in games. We know that Kojima is working on a project with Microsoft right now that is doing something similar.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we don't know whether or not that is for current gen or for next gen. Knowing what goes into Kojima games, I'm almost curious if it'll be a launch game for the next gen Xbox, which I think would be massive for Xbox. And they have ML based super resolution, which I think was a big deal. So essentially, they're going to use ML's machine learning, which is my preferred acronym over AI, but essentially they're going to have an AI chip on board, is my understanding, that will process the graphics and be able to kind of synthetically improve resolution, which I think will be kind of cool. I'll be interested in seeing what TVs can handle that in 5 years, or at least which TVs will make that be worth it.
Right.
But kind of a cool update. Other than that, I mean, they're still looking at using either an ARM or an AMD processor. I think the potential of using an ARM processor is a big deal. It's been a while since anybody's done that. I think technically the PS3 was an ARM processor, but that was also mostly built in-house by Sony and Toshiba. But that's becoming more and more popular in devices. I mean, you look at the new M1, M2 Max, those are all technically ARM processors. It just allows manufacturers to have more control over how it's built. And uses way less energy, which is also a notable point of the newer consoles that Microsoft's really pushing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like this easily has to be the furthest out we've ever been from a new generation, where we're already getting a glimpse at just how it's going to kind of get pieced together.
Yeah.
Which is kind of absurd, right? Like, again, you were saying how the general timeline makes sense, and like, yes, okay. So another thing to talk about is like the potential for this like mid-gen diskless Xbox Series X type console, slated for roughly 2024. But outside of that, they're already planning, once they release a console, they have to immediately start thinking about and looking ahead to what the next generation could and should and would look like. But obviously we normally don't get a glimpse or an idea of how it's truly going to be built until normally a year out, right? Certainly the people behind the scenes know sooner, but the general public isn't getting an idea of how this new effectively PC that they're going to be shipped is going to look like until about a year out. And so to get this idea and picture painted 5 years ahead of time, kind of crazy.
Yeah, I can't think of a time where this would have been leaked. I mean, it's only recently become relevant in the specs of a console, I'd say. I guess technically you can make an argument for the PS2 era because that was such a jump, but yeah. And I think this is kind of a big deal for Microsoft and not in a good way. I think building a hybrid console is a huge competitive advantage for them because they have existing infrastructure. It's funny they talk about Stadia in a lot of these leaks and how they think that Stadia didn't last so long because Google built it on an infrastructure that could be cannibalized for other things. So the risk of losing that investment was very low. Because obviously building servers is a huge expense. And it's a huge recurring expense based on how much energy to use. And, obviously Microsoft is kind of in the same boat in terms of at least the server space that they're using. It's my understanding that xCloud units are just kind of deconstructed Xbox Series X's, which if they shut down Xbox Cloud Gaming, don't really have a whole lot of use. Unless they can reconstruct them and sell them as used Xboxes, but I don't think that's really how it works.
Right.
So to build a hybrid console in the next gen for them is kind of a no-brainer because they have the resources. It's not a new investment. And, I think had this not leaked, they probably would have, I don't think Sony would have been doing this. And either Microsoft would have changed the game or they would have flopped entirely.
Yeah.
I would like to hope that the network infrastructure is better in 5 years, but who knows?
Right, obviously. It's an unknown.
And I think this was kind of it's not like this came out and people were like, oh wow, I would have never expected Xbox to do that. They've hinted at it in the past, but now Sony can see that and say, okay, they are having this conversation and they are working on developing that. So now what do we need to do to get to the same? If this is where we collectively see the industry going, how can we do the same?
Right. And you'd have to imagine Sony has already had those at least preliminary discussions.
Right.
Because I think this has definitely been a question that's been asked previously. So it's not completely out of left field. But to your point, they may have had those discussions and said, nah, we don't need to do that. And now that they see that Xbox is doing it, they can readjust.
I think what's interesting is if Sony were planning on doing this already, we would have seen them make a big acquisition in the server space. Because I do not believe that Sony already has these resources.
It's a good point.
Certainly not to the capacity that Microsoft does. And not that it needs to be the same capacity, because Microsoft obviously has many hats. But I don't know that what Sony has currently could sustain an entire generation of hybrid consoles. So it'll be interesting to see I would imagine it'd be in the coming months if they're going to take this seriously, if Sony makes any investment in cloud computing companies.
Yeah, definitely going to be something to keep an eye out for. And something that I guess it would have made waves regardless, because anything would have been like, oh, I wonder if this is what they're ramping up for. I would say now if they do it, it's a little more like this is definitely what they're doing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of what the industry fallout is around this, leak, and what other, like what Sony starts doing, what maybe Nintendo starts doing, and what it'll bring into question whether or not these things are happening because people are reacting to the information that is now out there.
Mm-hmm.
So many things that could have just been in the works regardless, right? That now you'll find, I think, a lot of people question if it's actually happening because people got a glimpse at what Microsoft was planning. Pretty crazy what like how this can kind of like impact so many different things, and some of it to Xbox's detriment.
Yeah, and you almost kind of wonder if this is what Sony was hoping for. That
I think Sony's responsible.
yeah,
I don't actually think that.
they have a plant in Microsoft who sent the non-redacted files to the FTC server.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, either way, Microsoft, like, it's a big loss for Microsoft to lose that competitive advantage. All for a stupid trial that is just has no bearing at all. And is now at this point pretty much over. I mean, that was the real bitch of it, is that this was pretty much passed. And yet this still leaked.
Yeah.
So that's just very unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, right? A trial that probably didn't need to even happen in the first place. So this stuff shouldn't have been moving around and should have been able to stay behind locked doors for them. And instead they needed to hand stuff over, and minor snafu leads to pretty big repercussions.
Right. So, and I guess to make the point clear on that for people who are unaware, I think the initial reaction was people blaming the FTC.
Yeah. Yes.
For messing this up. Which is reasonable. That was my thought too. Just because I've no faith in these commissions, not just the FTC, but most of them, at least in the United States or even elsewhere. But it was someone from Microsoft who, I guess, didn't send the right file, or to really put on your tinfoil hat, maybe intentionally sent the wrong file. I imagine that's not the case, because I'm assuming not just anybody can upload documents to the FTC portal. They probably have one person who's responsible, or two people.
Right.
But yeah. It's good. But I will say, since it's already out there, I am excited for some of the short-term either ideas or things that we can be pretty confident are coming. And one of them is the new Xbox controller, which is essentially a Stadia controller.
Yeah, was it the one that it like you lift it to?
Yeah, which is funny because that feature was supposed to be out in the Xbox One era.
Really?
Yeah, they had that advertised, I think, for launch, or they came out with like a refined version of the Xbox One controller around the time the One X came out. And it was supposed to be, if it sensed that it was laying flat on a table, it would go into like a rest mode.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pick it up, it would turn on. And they just never followed through on that. So that's an exciting feature they're talking about adding. Um, the other big thing is something they stole from Stadia, and that's that it's going to be Wi-Fi enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're playing an xCloud game, uh, it essentially uses Wi-Fi to connect directly to where the game is being served from,
Mm-hmm.
which has a significant speed increase over, I guess, right now the current method of either Bluetoothing or hardwiring to your client device, whatever you're playing on, and then having it pass the controls through the stream.
Right.
Um, I will say, having played Stadia a lot, that has worked. Their solution worked way better than anyone else's, and I think that's what made Stadia, in my opinion, at least hardware, very good. So I was excited to see that. Um, they're adding an accelerometer, which is interesting. So it'll be more like I don't know if that will be like the PlayStation, like what PlayStation has done for over a decade now, where it'll actually have some degree of input,
Mm-hmm.
or if that is just what's kind of enabling the lift to wake. Um, yeah, and they're just they're making it a lot more customizable, repairable, which is nice. Not that the current Xbox controller is that hard to fix, but it's nice to be able to fix a controller considering how often they have something go bad with them.
And I think the other thing is like this controller is expected to be like the mainline controller. This isn't like a heightened controller, right? Does that make sense? Like it's like
Yeah,
it's a $70
I
price point or whatever, right? It's not like it's not an elite controller.
I think it's supposed to kind of be a middle of the road. It's my understanding that they have like four, which is the one that currently comes with uh current gen Xboxes,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to have this one. Well, I don't know because I guess they're calling this one the core. So The Verge says they have it in the caption. Microsoft's new core gamepad, codenamed Sebel, Sebi, Sebely. I don't know. I don't know how to say it.
It's a bit of
Maybe may become the new default Xbox gamepad in May 2024.
It's interesting to have that happen like mid-generation.
Here's the weird thing for me, and this is kind of news as of yesterday. The Xbox Design Lab is now including like those color shift panels that we've been seeing a lot from them recently.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're, in my opinion, they're either not going to get rid of like the current controllers this generation, or they're going to kind of slowly phase them out over the remainder of the generation.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the graphic, and that really made it seem like the controller that comes with the Xbox currently is going to remain the one coming with the Xbox.
Right.
Then you have this option, which is $70, which not far off from the current gen controllers. I mean, you can get like the base black or white one at Walmart for like 40 or $45 now. They're pretty easy to find cheap. And then, I mean, they haven't refreshed the Elite in the series generation.
No, right.
So, I don't know if they're planning on doing that or if they're just content with making these base controllers and then having companies like Scuff make the Elite style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess long story long, I don't know. It sounds like they're making this the default, but I've seen other things that maybe contradict that.
Yeah. I mean, either way, this is a pretty big refresh for the controller. And I think a lot of the changes, even if they may seem like a small feature, I think are actually, rather large. So
Yeah, I mean, and they also have the improved haptics, which they are kind of stealing from PS5. So it's nice that they're seeing what other controllers have done and just kind of making the best of all worlds.
And I think that's like what every company should do, right? Like, um, better late than never, I guess, is like the perfect way of summing it up, right? Like if you see another company try out something and see how successful it is, you should be attempting to any way you can bring that to your players as well. So
I think it works out well for Xbox because um, I've never met an Xbox player unhappy with just like the base Xbox controller.
yeah, I would agree with that statement.
So um, Sony likes to innovate, Nintendo likes to innovate, Steam likes to innovate. So I think they're like you said, they're content to just sit back, see what innovations work, and then add later on.
I mean, think about the body style of the Xbox controller has always been the same roughly, right? Whereas you look at
Roughly, yeah.
the DualSense or DualShock controllers and those stupid things, like you go back and try and hold a PS3 controller and you're like, what the fuck is this shit? And that was just from going from PS4 to PS3. Now you go from PS5 to PS3 and it's like the worst thing in the world because the PS5 controller is finally like the perfect controller, in terms of like it's got the right hand feel and everything like that. And you thought you had that with the PS4 simply because the PS3 was just so bad in terms of its controller. So it's just funny.
Right.
Anything else from the leak?
Yeah, I'd say the last thing, kind of contradictory to at least what I've said in the past, is that there's evidently plans for a mid-gen refresh.
And it's so funny because Xbox was so adamant that
Yeah,
they weren't doing it. And so, yeah, I was also content to be like, okay, they're not going to do it.
Phil Spencer, you dog.
Yeah, you cheeky bastard. Yeah. I mentioned it kind of in passing, but yeah, the plans for it seems basically a discless Xbox Series X. That is like a mid-gen refresh.
I mean, there were some pretty substantial changes here, especially in terms of networking and I/O. The plan is to upgrade the 4K protocol in it, which for most people, probably not a big deal. Probably don't have a TV to recognize that. Having Wi-Fi 6, which again, a majority of people not going to take advantage of that, but I think we're going to start seeing that more as the standard, at least in the next 5 years. It's one of those things that I would have to completely redo my Wi-Fi system, which I've spent a significant amount of money on.
Of course.
But it's one of those upgrades worth making, as long as your provider enables it. USB-C on the front, which finally, I was a little shocked that wasn't the case on the original Series X, but it was on the PS5. And I think a lot of it too is again going with Microsoft's continued mission to be more sustainable. It's way more power efficient. There's technically going to be a new chip on board. It's nothing technically improved. It's just a smaller die, so it takes less to cool it. So they're saying around 15 to 20% less energy.
And I'm noticing in the graphic where it's like kind of like highlighting all of these aspects of it, it does say all new, more immersive controller. So I wonder if how kind of what you were talking about, where it's like the current controller that is shipping with the console will continue to be the one that ships with like that version of the console, but that new controller will be the standard controller if you were to get this codename Brooklyn console.
Yeah. That would make sense.
This feels like a good mid-gen upgrade. I will say, like I feel like, and they had they had a great one with the Xbox One too. So, I dig this. This is I think this is like, I love the timeline for it. Like, so there's a lot of personal potentially like bias on my end.
Yeah.
I think this is like the console if you don't have an Xbox already. Like, this is the one that it's probably worth the year wait, effectively.
Right. Yeah. If you don't have a physical library, you intend on getting Game Pass.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. I do suspect they will sell an external disk drive. And I think having the USB-C on the front kind of enables that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess the I/O on the back is changing too, but I don't think I've seen any detail about that. So maybe they'll throw a USB-C on the back as well. Yeah, like for me, I don't think there's really a whole lot of reason to upgrade. I'm very interested in the controller, but obviously I can just kind of buy that ad hoc.
Yep.
I don't think that the controller is going to work any better with the mid-gen upgrade. So like that's not really a reason. If it's next year, the big thing for me is Wi-Fi 6. But again, like I said, I'd have to redo my entire home network infrastructure to do that. So
right.
And if this comes out next year, which I think that seems like it would be the case, I know I'm not going to do it next year, so I'll probably get out of that window of FOMOing it and not bother. I guess I'll also state that they're doubling the storage on it.
Yeah, 2 terabytes internal.
Yeah, that's and they're keeping the price the same, which, I was going to say sounds like a good deal, but as I kind of just melted there, I realized that usually mid-gen upgrade comes with a price decrease, right? Am I crazy in thinking that?
No, I don't think it does, because I think normally when the mid-gen comes out, it's like the base that ends up getting the decrease.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I guess that was the case with the PS4 era, right?
Yeah, like,
because I think it was like $3.99 or $2.99 or $3.99 at launch, and then the Slim came out and it was the same price.
And then like the base went down to $2.99 or something like that. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that tracks.
I know with the PS3 era, at least with the PS3, I don't know with the Xbox, there was a significant price decrease, but that's because no one was buying the things.
Yeah, right.
Because they were $700.
Still insane.
Yeah. So, but I guess then the fact that they're keeping the price the same and doubling solid state storage, that's a pretty big deal.
I would say so. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, storage or memory and storage costs, basically silicon costs, are not going down from COVID. Maybe marginally, but almost altogether staying the same. So that's kind of a big deal. Hopefully that means that the external cards will continue to see decreases. But yeah, having the 2 terabytes is nice. I guess you kind of have to if you're getting rid of, well, I don't know. I was going to say, I guess it makes sense if you're getting rid of a disk drive, but it's not like they're not installing the entire game even
anymore.
If you have a disk drive. Yeah. Yeah. Seems like a good deal. If I didn't have an Xbox, I'd get one.
Great. Well, I'll take that as the endorsement for me to bite the $500 bullet, I guess.
Hey.
Yeah, no, this was definitely, again, it's a shame that they didn't get to do it on their own time, that they couldn't just keep up the whole, like, we're not doing a mid-gen refresh, and then maybe we will, and then kind of like, make you lose your mind. And
Yeah.
I'm sure some of the idea behind that was with this new like Series S 1 terabyte coming out, right? That's not out yet.
I think it just came out a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, my bad. So, but anyway, with that like having just come out, you want to try and get people to latch on there, and you want to see that, have some run before you go ahead and announce this other console that, again, I'm already looking at and going like, I can wait the year for this console. So, and that's, I think, generally just, again, the way of looking at the leak as a whole. You kind of, Xbox loses out on the ability to have that surprise factor.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think we're it was at least a crash course.
Yeah, I think we definitely hit the highest points. Again, because of having a weekly podcast, we're late to the game technically, but it's fun to break it down a little bit, and for me personally, get caught up on it. So, all right, well done. That does it. We didn't get a chance to talk about Tokyo Game Show, so we'll probably talk a little bit about that next week. We still have our discussions around the Q Lite or whatever the hell it's called, and the Nintendo Switch 2 and iPhones and their capabilities. So maybe we'll finally be able to talk about all that next week. But as always, thank you so much for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review or rating wherever you do listen to the podcast, that would also be greatly appreciated. And most importantly, go ahead and share this podcast with a friend. Other than that, we will talk to you next week.